The silence after you're gone is the loudest sound I've ever heard. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with all the words we would never get to say. And in those first few weeks people filled that silence for me. They came with casseroles and condolences. And they said the things you're supposed to say. They meant well, everyone meant so well. But the words started to form a pattern, a kind of chorus. What you two had was so rare, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of love. And then the one that settled deep into my bones, the one that became the unspoken rule of my life, y'all, never find a love like that again. Making a terrible mistake, it was a strange tension. The very people who wanted me to be happy seemed uneasy with the particular shape my happiness was taking. We had to navigate that. We had to be a solid unit, him and I, against the quiet, well-intentioned doubt. Our relationship grew in the quiet moments away from all those eyes. It was in the way he made me tea, without asking, in the way we could sit in comfortable silence, in the way he understood that some days were harder than others. It was steady. It was. A different memory surfaces, sharper and more painful. This was the lowest point, the moment the prophecy wasn't just something I feared. It was something I had fully, completely accepted as my truth. It was a Christmas Eve, maybe 2 or 3 years after the divorce. Id tried to go to a party, a festive gathering of friends. But Id left early. The couples, the laughter, the easy intimacy, it all felt like a play I hadn't been cast in. I came home to my silent, dark apartment. No tree, no decorations, just me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bathtub, the bathroom light harsh and unforgiving. I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the person staring back. The eyes were hollow, the face was tired. And I had this thought, this clear, cold, internal monologue. This is it. This is what the rest of my life looks like. You are permanently broken. The past has broken you. And the pieces are too sharp, too damaged to ever fit with anyone else's. The weight of it was physical, a crushing pressure on my chest. I surrendered to it. I gave up the fight. It was almost a relief, in a terrible way, to stop hoping, to accept the solitary future, to embrace the never. Because fighting, it was just too exhausting. From the kitchen, I hear a clatter of a pan. And then his laugh, a warm, rich, unforced sound that cuts through the memory like sunlight through fog. He's probably burning the toast again. The sound pulls me completely into the present, into this reality. And the memory of that cold bathroom vanishes, its power dissipated. I pick up the phone again. This time, I open one of the articles. I read the headline, not with the shock of seeing it for the first time, but with a slow, deliberate focus. A second chance at happiness. It says there's a photo of us leaving the venue, his hand in mine, my head thrown back, laughing. And I realize the headline isn't really for the public, it's for me. It's a monument. It's a marker placed right at the end of a long, arduous journey through a desert of doubt. That single line of text erases 1,000 silent whispers of never. It's a signpost. And I hope, I really hope, that someone else who is sitting on the edge of their bathtub, believing a terrible prophecy about themselves, might see it. And it might flicker, just for a second, as a small, distant possibility. I get out of bed. The day is beginning. I walk over to the closet, and on the top shelf, tucked away in the back, is an old cardboard box. It's the last one, the one I could never quite bring myself to deal with. It's filled with relics from that sad era, old photos that felt too painful to look at, letters, a dried flower from a birthday that ended in tears, the dregs of a life I thought was my only story. I take the box down. It's lighter than I remember. I don't open it. I don't need to revisit the contents. Their meaning has been transformed. They are no longer symbols of loss. They are simply evidence of a journey, the journey that led here, to this morning, to this headline, to the sound of laughter in the next room. I carry the box downstairs and out to the recycling bin. I lift the lid and place it inside gently. It's not an act of disrespect to the past. It's not anger or vengeance. It's a quiet acknowledgement that chapter is finished. Its weight is gone. The prophecy was wrong. The door I thought was locked and bolted forever was actually just stuck. And all it took was the right person at the right time, gently pushing it open. The bin lid closes with a soft final thud. It's not a loud, dramatic sound. It's a quiet one, the sound of a page turning, the sound of never becoming now real. And with every passing day, the new story we were writing together felt more true than the old sad prophecy ever had. The world is full of scripts, little pre-written narratives we're all supposed to follow, and one of the most persistent, most damaging ones is the one whispered at funerals, in hospital rooms, in the hushed tones after a divorce, the script that says, when you lose a great love, you'll never find love again. It's presented as a comfort, a testament to the depth of what you had. But it's a cage, and I am here to tell you from the other side that it's a lie we need to stop telling each other. You hear it everywhere in movies, where the widowed character is a tragic figure, forever defined by their loss in well-meaning advice from friends who say what you two had was so special it could never be replaced. It comes from this romantic, almost poetic idea that a true love is a singular event, a once-in-a-lifetime lightning strike. We've built a whole culture around the myth of the one. And in doing so we've romanticized eternal mourning. We've made staying perpetually sad the ultimate proof of your devotion if you move on. The unspoken accusation is that your love wasn't that strong to begin with. It's a terrible silent pressure. I felt that pressure like a physical weight in the raw early days of my grief. When people said you'll never find someone like him again, they meant it kindly. They were trying to honor what I'd lost. But what I heard was a life sentence. I heard that the best part of my life was over, that my capacity for joy, for partnership, for deep connection had died with my husband. That narrative didn't comfort me, it isolated me. It made me feel like my future was a barren, lonely place. I just had to endure it. Invalidated any flicker of hope. I might feel branding it as a betrayal. It framed love as a finite resource, and mine was all used up. And that's the real damage. This narrative doesn't just acknowledge pain, it actively predicts a future of perpetual pain. It tells a person in their most vulnerable state that their happy ending is impossible. Why is that our default? Why, when someone is suffering, do we feel the need to confirm their worst fears about the future? It's because we're uncomfortable with ambiguity. We'd rather offer a tragic certainty than a messy, uncertain hope. But in doing so we become architects of that person's despair. We build the walls of their prison with our words. My journey out of grief became, without me even fully realizing it, at first an active rebellion against that script. It wasn't just about healing from a personal loss. It was about fighting a whole culture's simplistic, destructive idea of love and loss. Every time I felt a moment of lightness, a genuine laugh, I felt a pang of guilt. That was the narrative working on me. It was telling me I was being disloyal. But as time went on, a new understanding began to dawn. It started with a simple, radical thought. What if love isn't a singular event? What if it's a capacity, a skill? Even what if the love I had for my husband didn't die with him, but rather it transformed into a deep, enduring gratitude? And what if that same capacity to love, that part of me that learned how to be a partner, how to be vulnerable, how to build a life with someone, was still very much alive? Choosing to date again felt like a radical act. I was stepping off the mapped-out path of the grieving widow and into uncharted territory. The challenges weren't just the normal nervousness of meeting someone new, they were battles against this external narrative, the surprised looks from people when I mentioned I was seeing someone, the subtle comments, "Oh, you're moving on, that's brave." The word brave was often a stand-in for foolish or disrespectful. I wasn't just navigating my own complicated feelings, I was. When we got engaged, it was a quiet moment at home. But planning the wedding was a completely different experience. It was no longer a private joy. It was a public statement. Every decision, from the venue to the invitations, felt weighted with meaning. We were planning this celebration under the gaze of all those who had once pitied me, who had believed my romantic life was essentially over, and there was a sense of defiant joy in it. Choosing the flowers, I didn't think about what might have been, I thought about what. Constantly pushing back against the world's expectation that I should be sad forever. In that rebellion, I found a strength I didn't know I had. There was a power in choosing a path less sanctioned by popular opinion. It forced me to define happiness on my own terms, not on the terms of a sad story everyone else found more comfortable. I had to believe deeply and truly that seeking love again wasn't an erasure of my past, but a continuation of it. The love I had known had taught me what to look for, what to value. It had made me a better person. To let that go to waste, to lock my heart away in a museum to the past, felt like the real betrayal. And then something happened that I never could have predicted. My wedding made headlines. It wasn't just a private celebration, it became a public event. "Widow finds love again" was the kind of headline that got clicks, and the very existence of that coverage, the fact that it was considered newsworthy, proved my point entirely. It was news because it broke the script. It challenged the assumption. The public's fascination was a testament to how uncommon we've allowed these stories to be. We're so conditioned to the tragedy narrative that a story of hope after profound loss seems like a miracle, an exception. But it shouldn't be an exception, it should be a possibility we all acknowledge and support. I saw the media attention not as an intrusion, but as an opportunity. In every interview, I made a conscious choice to steer the conversation away from just my personal fairy tale. I used the platform to talk about this larger societal issue. I talked about the well-intentioned phrases that had haunted me. I explained how the "you'll never love again" narrative had felt like a life sentence. I spoke about love as a capacity, not a limited commodity. I said that finding new love felt like honoring my late husband, not replacing him, because it was a testament to the beautiful model of partnership he had helped me understand. The story for a brief moment became bigger than me. It became a symbol. I saw comments online from people saying, "This gives me hope," or "I've been feeling so guilty for wanting to date after my loss. And this makes me feel less alone." That was the corrective. The headline wasn't just reporting an event. It was silently arguing against a harmful myth. It was showing people a different path, a different possible ending to the story. It was proving that a future isn't just possible, it can be beautiful, in a completely new and different way. This brings me to what I really want to say to you. This is a call to action. It's about the language we use. We have to change the conversation. The next time you're with a friend, a family member, anyone who has experienced a profound loss, I want you to pause before you speak, before you reach for that old familiar script about never finding love again. Choose a different set of words. Was and what was coming. It felt like an act of reclamation. I was taking back my own story. Instead of predicting a bleak future, try phrases that promote hope and acknowledge resilience. Say something like, "Your capacity to love is still there, and it's a part of what makes you who you are," or "I believe in your future happiness, whatever form it takes." You could say, "The love you had is a part of you forever, and it will inform whatever comes next." These statements are supportive, without being prescriptive. They don't force a timeline, they don't frame new love as a replacement, they simply affirm the person's strength and their right to a future filled with joy. This requires us to examine our own biases. We have to ask ourselves why we are so attached to stories of eternal sorrow. Are we truly comforting our friend? Or are we trying to make their pain more poetic, more manageable? For us to witness true support is messy. It means sitting with someone in their uncertainty and saying, "I don't know what your future holds, but I believe it holds good things for you." It means being an ambassador for a narrative of hope. The ultimate support we can offer someone isn't to condemn them to their past, but to express unwavering belief in their future. It's to see them not as a victim of their loss, but as a resilient human being capable of writing a new chapter. Love isn't about finding one person and then closing the book. It's about being brave enough to love honestly, to grieve deeply. And then, when you're ready to be brave enough to love again, it's about understanding that the heart isn't a vessel with limited space. It's a muscle that grows stronger with use. And the most supportive thing we can do is to have faith in its endless, incredible capacity. The first step, it's the quietest one, but it's the most important. You have to acknowledge the narrative you're telling yourself. Because after a loss, a voice starts speaking in your head. It's not always loud, sometimes it's a whisper. It says things like, "That was it, your one chance, y'all never feel that way again," or "It's safer here in this familiar pain. Why risk it?" You have to hear that voice, you have to really listen to it. I remember mine. It was a constant low hum in the background of my life. "You had your great love story. The chapter is closed." I accepted it as fact. The way you accept that the sun will set, it was just the way things were. But one day I got a notebook, a cheap, simple one, and I wrote those sentences down. I gave that voice a shape, letters on a page. "I will never love again. I am not built for that kind of happiness twice. It would be a betrayal to even try." Seeing them there in my own handwriting, it changed them. They went from being absolute truths to being just sentences, just words. I was choosing to believe. They lost their power. The real shift happened when I stopped at the period. I started asking, why not? Why couldn't my story have a second volume? Why was my capacity for love finite? Giving yourself permission to imagine a different future. It feels like a rebellious act at first. It feels dangerous, but it's the foundation of everything that comes after. You have to challenge the narrative before you can rewrite it. Step 2 is about your relationship with the past. This is delicate, and it's where a lot of people get stuck. You think that to move forward, you have to leave the past behind, you have to forget or lock it away. But that's not it. The work is to redefine that relationship, to honor what was without letting it dictate what can be. Then the news broke. I am still not entirely sure how it started. Maybe a local society columnist got a tip, maybe someone posted about it online. But suddenly, our wedding wasn't just our wedding anymore. It became a story. The headline was something like "A Second Chance at Love, Local Woman's Wedding Triumph After Tragedy." There was a picture of us smiling, and right next to it an older picture of me from years ago, from a much sadder time. Seeing it all laid out like that in black and white for me, this was the hardest part. I felt like if I smiled again, if I felt a flicker of joy with someone new, it meant I was erasing what I had before. The guilt was immense. So I created a ritual. It was simple. On the anniversary of the day we met, I would go to our favorite spot by the lake. I'd sit for an hour. I'd remember everything I wanted, to the good, the hard, all of it. I'd talk to the memory for a while, and then I'd stand up, and I'd walk away. I'd physically turn my back on that place and go back to my day. That ritual gave me a container for my grief. It gave it a time and a place. It meant I wasn't carrying it with me every single moment. I was compartmentalizing it, which sounds clinical, but it's what allowed me to make space for new joy. It allowed me to integrate that love into the fabric of my life, instead of letting it be a wall I couldn't get past. And that's why on my wedding day, there was a small, simple tribute, a single flower on a chair in the front row. It cast a shadow over the day. It was an acknowledgement. It was me saying the love I had for you made me who I am, and the person I am today is capable of loving this wonderful person standing beside me now. Loving again is not forgetting. It's a testament to the fact that love expands, it doesn't replace. Step 3 is where the rubber meets the road. It's about embracing vulnerability. And let me tell you, it feels terrifying after you've been hurt. Your instincts are to build walls, not doors. The idea of being that open again, of handing someone the map to all your broken places, it feels like insanity. You have to start small. You don't run a marathon on a broken leg. You take a single step. For me, that meant practicing connection in low-stakes environments, striking up a real conversation with the barista, not just a transactional one, accepting a casual invitation to a group dinner with acquaintances, just being present with people, without the pressure of it being a date. You're rebuilding your emotional muscles, and they've atrophied. They need gentle exercise. Then came the first dates. Oh, the first dates, they were awkward. I was a ghost of my former self, trying to perform a version of a person I thought I was supposed to be. I'd sit there, and my mind would be a constant comparison machine. He doesn't laugh at that joke the same way. She has a different scent. It was exhausting. I was so busy measuring the new person against a memory that I wasn't even seeing the real living human in front of me. The moment of decision came on a third date. We were walking through a park, and he was telling a story about his family. It was a vulnerable story, something a little messy, and I felt this familiar pull to retreat, to offer a polite surface-level response. But I made a choice. I took a breath, and I shared something real about my own family, about my own past. It wasn't the whole story, but it was a piece of truth, and the sky didn't fall. He didn't run away, he just listened. And in that moment I realized, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling that tightness in your chest, that voice screaming abort mission, and you choose to lean in anyway. You choose to be fully present despite the risk. Finally, step 4. This is the part that might surprise you. Celebrate your victory, publicly. This isn't about boasting, it's about claiming your new chapter. It's about solidifying your new narrative, not just for yourself, but as a beacon for others who are still in step 1, still listening to that voice that says never. Everyone to see was surreal. For a moment, I felt exposed. This deeply personal joy was now public property. For me, that was the wedding headline, from heartbreak to happily ever after. How one woman found love again. It felt a little bold, a little exposing, but it was the truth. It was my truth. And in the days after the wedding, the messages started coming in from old friends, from distant relatives, from people I barely knew. They said things like, "I saw your story, and it gave me hope. I've been so afraid to try again, but seeing your joy, maybe it's possible." That's when it all clicked. Your journey, with all its stumbles and its courage, can be a roadmap for someone else sharing. It closes the loop on your own healing. It takes your private victory and turns it into something that can nourish others. It says, "I was where you are. Look what can happen." Your headline is waiting to be written. It might not be in a newspaper, it might be a conversation with a friend, a post you share, or simply the new light in your own eyes. But claim it, share it. Your story isn't over, it's just getting to the good part. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was a heavy, suffocating kind of silence. that seemed to absorb all other sound the world outside kept moving cars. Past people talked on the street life. Went on but inside these four walls. Everything was muffled like I was living inside a thick glass jar. The hum of the refrigerator would click on. And it would feel like an intrusion. The floorboards didn't creak the same way under only my weight. I'd sit in the living room and just listen. To the absence of his laughter, the absence of the radio he always had on in the morning, the absence of the simple sound of another person breathing in the same space. It was a physical pressure on my eardrums, this silence, a constant reminder of the empty space beside me. And the light, it changed too. It was like the color had been drained from everything. The sun would come through the windows, but it felt weak, diluted. The walls seemed to absorb the light, instead of reflecting it. I'd look at the armchair he always sat in, and it was just a shape, a Chinese letter, object, a monument. His coffee mug was still on the shelf, and just seeing it there unused was a visual ache. Everything was a painful reminder. The world had turned into a series of gray tones, the vibrant red of the curtains we'd chosen together now looked like a dull rust. The green of the plant on the mantelpiece seemed tired, dusty. My whole world had become dim. And the prophecy they all whisper at that I would never love again, that this kind of loss was a permanent ending, felt less like an opinion, and more like a law of physics. It was in the air, in the quiet, in the very light that filtered through the blinds. It was a sensory truth. The heaviness was in everything I touched. The blankets on the bed were like lead weights. Getting out from under them each morning was a monumental effort. And the bed itself, I started sleeping on one side, my side. The other side remained perfectly made, cold and smooth. To the touch, I'd run my hand over the empty space, and the chill would go right through me. Putting on one of his old sweaters for warmth was a mistake. The wool was soft, but it carried a scent that was fading, and the emptiness inside the fabric was worse than the cold. The tactile world had become a landscape of loss. Every surface was a memory. Every texture was a ghost. The first crack happened on a Tuesday. It was raining, a steady gray rain that matched my mood perfectly. I was walking back from the grocery store, head down, listening to the sound of my own footsteps on the wet pavement. And then I heard it faintly from a car stereo stopped at a traffic light. A song. We both hated, a cheesy, overplayed pop song from years ago. We'd always mock it, singing along dramatically in the car. And hearing it now, instead of the pain I expected, I felt nothing, and then a flicker, But then the messages started flooding in, emails, comments, letters. They weren't from journalists, they were from people who had followed my story from the beginning, people who had also been told never again. They wrote to say thank you for showing them that it was possible, that life could have a second beautiful chapter. The overwhelming support completely overshadowed any lingering trace of past doubts. The wedding day itself was a blur of happiness, but I remember one moment with perfect clarity, it memory of us laughing, not crying. It was just a few seconds before the light changed, and the car drove away, taking the music with it. But the silence it left behind was different. It wasn't the heavy silence of before, it was just quiet. Later that week, I saw the flower. It was a tulip, a shocking, almost violent shade of red, growing in a crack in the pavement, next to the bus stop. I must have passed it 100 times, and never seen it, but that day the gray world seemed to part around it. The color was so vivid, it felt like a punch. I just stood and stared at it. The petals were perfect, velvety. The green stem was a bright, defiant slash against the concrete. It was the first thing I'd truly seen in months. It wasn't a memory, it was just a flower, a new thing. And for a moment the gray palette I'd been living in fractured. Then there was you. The sensory details of you came in slowly, like someone turning up a dimmer switch on the world. The first thing I noticed was the sound of your laughter. It wasn't loud, but it had a warmth to it, a resonance that seemed to push back against the quiet in my apartment. You laughed at something I said, and for the first time, the sound of laughter in that room didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt possible. Then it was the warmth of your hand. We were walking, and your hand brushed against mine. And then you held it. The feeling was so immediate, so present. It wasn't a memory of a touch. It was your skin, the pressure of your fingers lacing through mine. It was a solid, warm weight that anchored me to the sidewalk, to the moment. You had a scent too, not of cologne, but of soap and fresh air, and something uniquely you. It didn't clash with the fading scent of memory. It simply existed alongside it, a new note in the air. The internal conflict was a sensory war. My old numb world was comfortable in its grief. It was a known quantity. The return of vividness was almost painful. The brightness of a sunny day could feel aggressive. The sound of a crowded restaurant was overwhelming, a cacophony, where before there had only been muffled noise. Letting the new sensations in felt like a risk, it felt like disloyalty. But the warmth of your hand was stronger than the cold of the empty side of the bed. The sound of your voice was more compelling than the silence. The world was slowly, insistently coming back into technicolor, and I had to decide whether to squint against the light or let my eyes adjust. The morning of the wedding, the sun wasn't weak, it was brilliant golden, pouring through the window of the room. Where I was getting ready, the light caught the dust motes in the air, making them look like glitter. I could hear the soft, busy sounds of preparation from downstairs. Clatter of plates being set, the distant murmur of voices. But up here it was calm. I looked at myself in the mirror. The suit wasn't black or gray. It was a deep navy, a color. My hands trembled as I fixed my tie, and the sensation was not of fear but of a thrilling, almost unbearable anticipation. The ride to the venue was a symphony of small sounds: the purr of the car engine, the soft radio music, the sound of my own breathing. When we arrived, the first thing that struck me was the visual explosion. The garden was a riot of color: flowers in every hue, deep purples, bright yellows, creamy whites were everywhere. Banners of fabric in a sunset orange fluttered in the breeze. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of a great oak tree, creating a dappled pattern on the grass. It was the absolute opposite of my gray world. Was during the ceremony, while we were exchanging vows, I looked out at the guests. I saw the faces of those same friends and family members who had once worried, who had once spoken those nevers with such love in their hearts. And I saw no skepticism there. I saw only joy, pure, unadulterated joy. Their tears were happy ones. The narrative had been broken not by argument, but by the simple, undeniable evidence of our happiness. The celebration wasn't just a party, it was a refutation, a victory shared. It was a declaration. Then the pre-ceremony silence fell. It was a different silence than the one I knew. This was a held breath, a collective happy anticipation. I stood at the front, and the only sound was the rustle of leaves and the distant song of a bird. Then the first notes of the processional began: a cello. The sound was deep, resonant, vibrating right through the soles of my shoes and up into my chest. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. And then I saw you walking towards me. The sunlight was behind you, creating a halo effect. I could see the details of your outfit, the way you held the bouquet, the slight nervous smile on your face. But all of that faded away. When our eyes met, the look in your eyes was a universe of feeling. It was love, yes, but also understanding, a shared history of our own. A promise in that look was all the silence I had endured, all the gray days, and the brilliant, defiant joy of this one. The music swelled, but it was secondary to the visual of you walking this path, choosing this, choosing me. When we said our vows, your voice was clear. It didn't tremble, it was firm and sure. I heard every word, not just the words themselves, but the intention behind them. The sound of my own voice answering back felt strong, a sound I finally recognized as my own. Then the ring, the feel of the cool, smooth metal as I slipped it onto your finger. The perfect, solid weight of it was a tactile promise, a permanent sensation. Pronouncement, and then the eruption, the cheers and applause of our family and friends. Wasn't a muffled noise. It was a wave of sound that washed over us, loud and joyful and real. The first embrace, the feel of you in my arms, the solidity of you, the warmth. It was a tactile joy so profound it erased every cold memory. The rest of the day was a sensory overload in the best way: the taste of champagne, the sound of clinking glasses, and laughter, the feel of dancing, of being passed from one hug to another. It was defiant sensory joy, a symphony we had conducted out of the silence. Later in our new home, the quiet returned, but this silence was different. It was a comfortable hum, the sound of the dishwasher running, the soft click of the dog's nails on the hardwood floor, the rustle of you turning a page in your book on the sofa next to me. This silence was filled with presence. It was a shared quiet, a peaceful space. I saw the photo online a few days later. A friend had tagged us there. We were frozen in a moment. The visual was stunning, the vibrant colors of the garden, the sunlight, the absolute unguarded joy on both our faces. It was a permanent sensory record, a testament proof against the old prophecy. And now when I wake up, the light through the window is just light. It illuminates the life we've built together. The sounds of the house are the sounds of our life. The touch of your hand is a familiar grounding comfort. The senses that once recorded only pain now catalog 1,000 tiny joys. The scent of coffee you make in the morning, the sound of your key in the door at the end of the day, the weight of your head on my shoulder. When we watch a movie, the story didn't end with a bang. It settled into the peaceful sensory rich not in spite of the past, but with a full acknowledgement of it. Quiet of a promise, kept a love they said, was impossible documented not in grand speeches, but in the everyday sounds and sights of a life shared. After the honeymoon, when life settled into its new wonderful rhythm, I thought about those headlines. I thought about the journey from being a headline about loss to becoming a headline about love. It's a strange thing to have your life summarized like that for public consumption. But if there's a message in it for anyone else out there who is being told what their future cannot hold, it's this: love is not a finite resource. The heart isn't a container with limited space. It's more like a muscle. It can grow, it can. They said it with such gentle certainty, as if they were stating a simple fact of the universe, like gravity or the changing of the seasons. And in my grief I believed them. How could I not? To even imagine another person felt like a betrayal. To think about a future that wasn't shrouded in that loss felt impossible. I started to wear their prediction like a coat. It was a shield too. It gave me a reason to say no to invitations, to close myself off. Why try to move on when everyone, including some deep part, expand to hold new love, without letting go of the old? The love I had for you that wasn't erased, it's still here, it's a part of me. But it exists now alongside a new, different, and equally profound love. One didn't cancel out the other, they just coexist. It takes courage to believe in a second chapter. It's easier sometimes to accept the tragic ending that everyone expects for you. It's safer. But rewriting your own story, choosing to believe that happiness isn't a one-time offer, that is the bravest thing a person can do. The new headline isn't about proving anyone wrong, it's about proving to yourself that hope is a powerful, resilient force, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones we never saw coming. The first time I saw my name in a headline, it wasn't my name anymore, it was a symbol. It was a story everyone felt they had a right to know. Local businessman's world shattered, tragedy strikes prominent family. They had to find a photo, of course. They used one from a charity gala the year before. I am in a tuxedo, my arm around Sarah, her head tilted against my shoulder, both of us laughing at something just off camera. In the article, that photo was no longer a memory of a happy night. It was a relic, a before picture, in a story that only had an after. That became my public identity, the man in the tragedy. For a long time the media attention felt like a bizarre, unwelcome form of support. People recognized me at the grocery store not with smiles, but with those slow, sympathetic nods. They'd stop me, touch my arm, and say they'd read about me, as if reading about my life gave them some special insight into the emptiness inside my house. The articles kept coming, each one a fresh layer of cement around this statue of grief they were building for me. They'd talk about Sarah's vibrant spirit, her community work, the cruel randomness of the accident, and then always the inevitable conclusion: my happiness was over. The story had reached its end. The final chapter was written in loss. I felt like a character in a book everyone had already read. I'd walk down the street and see it in people's eyes. Oh, there he is, that's the poor man from the article. They thought they knew my entire story, they'd pitied me, cried for me, and then in a way they'd put me away on a shelf. The narrative was so complete, so final, there was no room in it for a morning where I might wake up and not feel the weight immediately. No allowance for a genuine smile at a stupid joke on TV. The world had decided my role, and any deviation from the script felt like a betrayal of the character they'd created. The pressure was a constant, low hum in the background of my life. I was living under the scrutiny of a story that wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to everyone. So when I started seeing Julia, the first and most powerful instinct was to hide. It wasn't about shame. It was about protection, protecting this fragile, beautiful, unexpected thing from the glare of a public that only knew how to see me one way. Our early dates were in towns where no one knew us. We'd take long drives, have picnics by lakes with no names. It was a quiet rebellion, a secret life, blooming in the shadow of my public one. The joy I felt with her was so private, so precious, I guarded it like a treasure. But there was always this tension, this fear that someone would see us, that a single phone photo would break the story. The man they'd all written off as a permanent figure of grief was laughing again, was loving again. I felt like I was living a double life, and the weight of the public persona was a heavy coat I had to take off whenever I walked through my own front door. Of myself was certain that the best was already behind me. I began to define myself by that absence. I was the widow, the one who had experienced the great love, and was now destined for a quieter, smaller life. The narrative was set, my story had reached its peak, and the rest would just be a long, gentle decline. The decision to get married was ours completely, but the decision to have a wedding a real one with guests, and a ceremony that was a different kind of decision, we knew what it meant. We were throwing a stone into the pond of public perception. And we knew the ripples would reach everyone who had ever read my name in a paper. This wasn't just about celebrating our love. It was a statement. It was an act of reclaiming the narrative. We were going to transform the story from one of an ending to one of a beginning. We talked about it for weeks. Did we elope? Did we hide, or did we stand in the sunlight and say, here we are, look at this? The careful planning wasn't just about flowers and seating charts. It was about how we would control the story. This time we decided we would invite one reporter from the same paper that had run the first most painful article. We would give them exclusive access. But on our terms, we would give them the interview before the wedding, so the story would break on the morning of the ceremony. We were going to frame the narrative before anyone else could. The day the engagement was announced, it was like a switch flipped. I remember sitting at my desk refreshing the news website, and then it was there, not as a gossip column snippet, but as a feature. The headline was everything we hoped it would be: from loss to new love, a story of resilience. The words leaped off the screen: joy, redemption, new beginning. They were using the same vocabulary they once used for my despair, but now it was pointed toward the future. They'd even used a photo we provided, one Julia had taken of us on a hiking trip, both of us looking windswept and genuinely happy. It was a complete contrast to the somber, formal photo from the gala. This was us now, alive. The interview was the most nerve-wracking part, sitting down with that journalist, a woman named Diane, who had written one of the more poignant pieces. After Sarah's death felt like facing a ghost. But she was different this time. She was gentle. But she was listening. I didn't talk about moving on, because you never really move on. I talked about moving forward. I talked about how grief isn't a line you cross, it's a landscape you learn to live in. And I talked about how love isn't a finite resource. Finding Julia didn't mean I loved Sarah any less. It meant my heart had somehow miraculously found a way to expand. I talked about hope, not as a naive concept, but as a deliberate daily choice. I saw Diane taking notes, not with the frantic energy of a reporter chasing a scoop, but with a kind of quiet respect. When the article came out, it was clear she had heard me. She had woven my words into a piece that was honest about the past, but radiant with hope for the future. Reading it, I didn't feel like a subject. I felt like a person. I was reclaiming my identity right there on the printed page. The impact of that news story was immediate and profound. My phone started buzzing with messages, but they weren't the cautious, pitying notes I was used to. They were full of exclamation points and congratulations. But the most powerful messages came from strangers. Emails started trickling in, then flooding in. People who had followed my story years ago, people who had also experienced loss and felt trapped by it. They wrote to say that seeing my wedding announcement had given them a strange new permission to hope. One woman wrote that she'd been wearing widow's black for 5 years, and after reading the article, she went out and bought a yellow dress. Another man said he'd been on a single date and felt so guilty he never called the woman back. But now he was going to. We had publicly defied the sad ending everyone had assigned to us, and in doing so we had thrown a rope to others stuck in the same kind of narrative. The turning point was so quiet, almost imperceptible. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun was coming through the kitchen window, hitting a spoon on the counter in a way that made a little spot of light on the wall. And I just looked at it. And I realized I was tired. I was so tired of the weight of that never. I was exhausted from living inside a story someone else had written for me. It was a conscious decision, a flicker of defiance. It wasn't about replacing you, it was about. It made me meditate on the power of the media, that strange double-edged sword. It has the immense power to confine, to label, to freeze you in a single moment of your life, and define you by it. It can build a box around you and call it your story. But it also has the power to liberate when you seize that power for yourself, when you decide to step into the spotlight on your own terms. You can shatter that box. The same machine that amplified my grief was now amplifying my joy. It was a reminder that the narrative is never fixed unless you allow it to be. The press didn't change my story, Julia, and I did, but the press gave that new story a microphone. And in doing so, it reached people who needed to hear it most, including a version of myself from years ago who thought the final page had already been turned. Our wedding day was beautiful, but the real victory wasn't the ceremony itself. It was the headline that greeted our guests that morning. It was the proof printed in black and white for everyone to see that a story is never over until you decide it is. The first time I mentioned I was thinking about dating again, the silence on the other end of the phone was heavier than any words could have been. It was my older sister Sarah. She finally cleared her throat, and I could hear the careful, measured tone she uses. When she thinks I am being irrational, it's only been 2 years, she said. Don't you think it's a bit soon? People will talk. And that was it. That was the beginning of the chorus. People will talk, as if public opinion was the ultimate arbiter of my grief. My capacity to love again. Sarah became the voice of pragmatic concern. Her arguments were always framed as protection. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Say you're vulnerable right now. This new person, they can't possibly understand what you've been through. It's not fair to them. And it's not fair to you. You're probably just rebounding. Every time I shared a small happy detail about Alexau, he made me laugh. The way he listened, the simple comfort of holding someone's hand again. I'd see that slight frown on her face, the one that said she was humoring me. Shed nod. But her eyes were full of pity, as if I were a child building a castle out of sand, oblivious to the incoming tide. Then there was Mark, a friend from the support group. He lost his wife around the same time I lost David. He became the voice of hardened pessimism. No one will ever measure up to David. He'd tell me over coffee his own grief, a fortress. He had no intention of leaving. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. Why put yourself through that? Why not just learn to be happy on your own? His skepticism felt different from Sarah's. Hers came from a place of worry. His felt like a betrayal. It was as if my finding happiness was a critique of his decision to remain in his pain. He wanted company in the loneliness, and my stepping away felt like a personal abandonment. And surrounding all of it, there was the unspoken pressure from society itself, the expectation of perpetual mourning, the idea that a certain amount of time must pass before you're allowed to smile again, to feel a flutter in your chest, to even think about a future that isn't shrouded in shadows. You feel the weight of other people's expectations in every hesitant question, in every changed subject. When you mention a new friend, the world has a script for widows and widowers, and it doesn't include a second act. Choosing to remain open to the possibility of something, maybe not love, not yet, but just life, a decision to challenge the narrative, not for anyone else, but for myself to see if maybe, just maybe, the world had a different plan. It's a supporting role in your own life, defined solely by your loss. The worst part was the internal conflict in the quiet moments late at night. Their voices would echo in my head. What if Sarah was right? What if it was too soon? What if I was just trying to fill a void? And this wasn't real. What if Mark was right? And no one could ever measure up. The logical part of my brain, the part that had been trained by loss to expect the worst, would seize on these doubts. It would take a genuine, tender moment with Alex and dissect it, looking for proof that it was an illusion. I'd find myself pulling away from him at times, not because of anything he did, but because of this internal battle. Defending this fragile new happiness was exhausting. It was like carrying a small flickering flame through a wind tunnel, constantly having to cup my hands around it to keep it alive. The emotional toll was immense. There were days I thought it would be easier to just extinguish the flame myself, to go back to the gray, predictable safety of solitude. But then there was Emma, my college roommate, who lived 3,000 miles away, but felt closer than anyone. She was the first person I told about Alex, and her reaction wasn't a silence or a frown. It was a squeal of pure delight. Tell me everything, she demanded. What does his voice sound like? Does he make you laugh? Oh, I can hear it in your voice. You're glowing. She became my chief believer. When I'd call her wavering, repeating Sarah's concerns, she would shut it down immediately. Too soon, according to whose calendar? Grief isn't linear. Your heart knows what it needs. She never met Alex, but she believed in us with a ferocity that left me breathless. She was my anchor on the days when the doubts felt like they would pull me under. A text from her would appear: thinking of you too, so happy for you. It was a lifeline. And there was my cousin Michael. He'd flown in for David's funeral, and he'd seen me at my absolute lowest. He came to visit 6 months after I started seeing Alex, and he pulled me aside after dinner. He looked me straight in the eye and said, I see a light in you that I haven't seen in years. It's good to see you again. That was all. No analysis, no warnings, just a simple acknowledgement of my joy. He and his wife became a safe harbor. Their home was a place where Alex and I could just be. We could laugh loudly, talk about the future, even talk about David, without feeling like we were being watched or judged. The energy I spent anxiously navigating the doubters was replenished tenfold in the company of the believers. They gave us the oxygen we needed to breathe life into this new love. Which is why the wedding guest list became such a deliberate, meaningful act. It wasn't just a list of names, it was a statement. Of course, Emma and Michael, and his wife were at the very top. But so was Sarah. And after a long, difficult conversation with myself, I even sent an invitation to Mark. It wasn't an invitation born out of spite. It wasn't about shaming them. It was about inclusion. It was about saying you were a part of this journey. The difficult part now, I want you to be a part of the joy. I want you to see with your own eyes that what you feared was a mistake is in fact my salvation. The atmosphere at the wedding was palpable. You could feel it the moment you walked in. On one side of the room, there was a radiating warmth from the supporters. Emma was crying happy tears before the ceremony even started. Michael was beaming, giving me a thumbs up from his seat. Their joy was a tangible force, a cushion of love that surrounded us. The first date was a disaster. I spent the whole evening comparing everything to memories of you, the way he laughed, the way he held his fork, the topics of conversation. It all felt wrong. It felt like trying to fit a new key into an old lock. I went home and cried, convinced everyone had been right. This was a fool's errand. I decided to stop trying. I focused on work, on friends, on just rebuilding a life that felt like my own. And on the other side, there was a different energy, not hostile, but sober. I saw Sarah sitting stiffly next to our mother. She was looking around the venue, at the flowers, at the guests, at me standing at the front. And I could see the gears turning in her head. She was being confronted with evidence. She could not deny the happiness wasn't a performance, it was in the air we breathed. Mark came alone. He stood at the back looking uncomfortable. But he came, and that in itself felt like a small victory. The most powerful moment came during the cocktail hour. After the ceremony, I was floating on a cloud, holding Alex's hand. When Sarah approached us, her eyes were redrimmed. She hugged me, a real hug, not her usual careful pet. She pulled back and held my face in her hands. I was wrong, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I was so worried about protecting you from a fall that I couldn't see you were already learning to fly. He's wonderful. And you look so whole. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. It was an admission, a surrender to joy. And in that moment, every defensive argument I'd ever rehearsed in my head just melted away. Vindication wasn't bitter, it was sweet. And it was laced with compassion for her fear. When Alex and I stood on the altar ready to say our vows, I asked for a moment. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who had carried me through the darkest valley, and now stood with me on this sunlit peak. I need to thank some people, I said, my voice steady, despite the tears in my eyes. I need to thank the people who, when I only had a flicker of hope, saw a future flame. To Emma, for being my cheerleader from across the country. To Michael, for giving us a safe space to just be. Your belief in us was the fuel that kept us going when the road got hard. You are part of this story, you are part of this victory. The wedding was the final word. It was the answer to every skeptical comment, every worried glance, every internal doubt that had ever whispered in the dark. The music, the dancing, the sheer, unadulterated joy on Alex's face, it was all a celebration that drowned out the chorus of doubt forever. The lesson etched into my heart that day is simple but profound. You have to trust the quiet, persistent voice of your own heart over the loud, fearful voices of the world. And you have to cherish with every fiber of your being the people who believe in your resilience. They are the ones who see not just who you were, but who you are meant to become. This day, this love, this second chance, it was for them too. It was for everyone who doubted, to show them that love is possible after loss. And it was for everyone who believed. Thank them for making it possible. The silence in my apartment was a physical thing. It had weighed, it pressed down on the air, thick and heavy, until even the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. I would sit in it for hours, just letting it settle over me. It was easier than trying to fill it. People would say things to me, well-meaning things, and the words would just bounce off. But one phrase didn't bounce, it stuck, it sank in. Y'all never find a love like that again. It was meant as a comfort, I think, a recognition of what I'd lost. But it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like a verdict, a life sentence. And that's when it happened, when I'd completely stopped looking. It was at a charity book sale of all places. I was reaching for the same copy of a beaten-up old novel as someone else. Our hands touched, and we both laughed and said, "Sorry, you take it." It was such a simple, silly moment. But there was no pressure, there was no comparison. We just started talking about books. And an hour later we were still standing there between the shelves. This connection felt different. It didn't feel like it was competing with the And the craziest part was I started to find a strange, twisted comfort in it. If it was never going to happen then, I was off the hook wasn't. I didn't have to try. I didn't have to put myself out there. I didn't have to risk that kind of shattering pain again. The world became very simple, painted in shades of gray. Every man I met, it already dismissed him, not because of anything he did, but because of this story. I was telling myself the story that said my chance at love had come and gone, that the best part of my life was over. This narrative became my armor. It was heavy, and it was cold, but it protected the raw, exposed parts of me. It was a prison. But at least the walls were familiar. I knew every crack in the plaster, every shadow that danced across the floor at 3 in the morning. The loneliness was terrible, but it was a known quantity. The potential for new pain was an abyss I refused to look into. Then there was a crack, a tiny one. I was at a grocery store of all places. I was reaching for the same box of cereal as someone else. Our hands touched. Just for a second it was nothing, but he laughed and I laughed. And for that one split second the heavy blanket of never lifted just for a breath. And in that space, I felt light. And then of course the old narrative crashed back down. See, the voice in my head said, it's just a moment, it doesn't mean anything, remember the rule, never again. But the crack was there, and once a crack appears the light starts getting in. I started to question the walls I'd built. Were they protecting me? Or were they just keeping me trapped? Was I honoring a lost love by building a shrine to my own loneliness? That was the first frightening thought, that my grief had become an excuse, a very good, very justified excuse to stop living. Unraveling that core belief was like trying to dismantle a bomb. Every move I made felt like it could set everything off. The first time I agreed to go for a coffee with someone, my internal voice was screaming. It was a full-in panic. This is a mistake. You're breaking the rules, you're being disloyal, you're going to get hurt. I almost canceled a dozen times sitting across from him. I felt like a fraud. He was nice, he was funny, and I was sitting there having a perfectly pleasant conversation while this war was raging inside my head. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. I could feel a genuine connection starting to form, a tiny spark, and my old belief was trying to smother it with a wet blanket. It was exhausting. I started writing things down. At first it was just the pain, pages and pages of I miss you, and this is impossible. But slowly the entries started to change. I began to challenge the story I would write. The narrative says I will never love again. But what if that's not true? What if it's just what I am choosing to believe right now? It felt like rebellion. Therapy helped give me the language for it. My therapist called it cognitive reframing. I just called it trying to save my own life. I started to collect evidence against the never. That coffee date didn't end in disaster. I survived. I even enjoyed parts of it. A smile from a stranger on the street, a conversation with a friend that made me feel seen. These were small things, but I logged them like a scientist building a case against my own pessimism. The shift was glacial, but it was real. It moved from I will never love again to maybe it's possible, but not for me. And then one day I wrote the words, I am capable of loving again. I didn't fully believe it yet, but writing it down felt like planting a flag on a new shore. Meeting you was the evidence that broke the case wide open. It wasn't a dramatic movie-style moment. It was quiet, it was steady, it was in the way you listened, really listened. Not just waiting for your turn to talk, it was in the way you didn't try to compete with a ghost. You created your own space. And being with you didn't feel like a betrayal of my past. It felt like an affirmation of my capacity to love, period. You were living proof that my old story was a lie. The belief didn't vanish overnight. Past, it felt entirely new. It was its own unique thing. It was comfortable, it was easy, it was built on a foundation of understanding that I had a history, that my heart had other rooms in it. And that was okay. He wasn't trying to erase anything, he was just offering to build something new right alongside it. Sometimes in the early days, I'd catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd have moments of panic thinking, this is too good, it can't last. But you were so patient, you created a safety that allowed me to finally fully step out from behind those walls. The wedding planning process was like an active, joyful rewriting of my entire story. Every decision was a declaration. Choosing the flowers wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a choice to embrace beauty again. Picking the music was choosing to fill that old heavy silence with sound and joy. Addressing the invitations was me formally announcing to the world, and to myself, that I was not the tragic figure I had believed myself to be. I was building a new life brick by brick, and each brick was stamped with hope. The morning of the wedding, I remember looking in the mirror. I wasn't just looking at a woman in a white dress. I was looking at the person who had survived, the person who had sat in the crushing silence, and had somehow found the courage to make a sound again. I saw strength in my own eyes. I saw joy, I saw a whole person, not a broken half of something the past was integrated. It was a part of my history, a chapter that had shaped me. But it wasn't the whole book. My heart hadn't replaced what was lost. It had expanded to make room for something new. It proved that love isn't a finite resource, it multiplies. Walking down the aisle towards you was the final physical act of shedding that never identity. With every step I felt lighter. I was leaving that prison of my own making behind. I wasn't walking away from my past. I was carrying its lessons with me, walking towards my future. And seeing you there waiting for me, your face full of so much love and certainty, it was the ultimate vindication. It was the peace of proving yourself wrong in the best way imaginable. It was the quiet, profound understanding that I had been the author of my own misery, and now I was the author of my own joy. The never had been a shield, but it was also a cage, and choosing I do was choosing freedom. It was choosing to believe in my own resilience. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a messy, unpredictable path with setbacks and surprises. It takes courage to question the stories we tell ourselves, especially the painful ones that feel so true. It takes bravery to look at a belief that has kept you safe, and to admit that it's also keeping you small. But the most radical act of self-love is to redefine your own life, to look at an ending and decide that it's not the end of your story, it's just the beginning of a new, unexpected chapter, when you have the courage to write for yourself. Good morning. The first thing I notice isn't the light coming through the blinds, it's the phone on the nightstand. Its screen lit up with a quiet, persistent frenzy. A soft, buzzing hum, then another, and another. It's like a distant hive has chosen this moment to wake up right beside me. I reach for it, my hand still heavy with sleep. The screen is a cascade of notifications, text messages, mostly a few emails, social media alerts, all variations on a single stunning theme: my name, his name, and the word wedding. It's there in black and white in headlines from blogs and newspapers. I've actually heard of our private sacred joy has gone public overnight. It's become a story for people to read with their morning coffee. It should feel invasive, this sudden spotlight. But right now, in the quiet of course, the outside world hadn't gotten the memo. The whispers started, the concerned looks from family members, who had been my pillars of support. I could see the questions in their eyes. Is this too soon? Is she just rebounding? How can she do this? It was especially hard from the ones who had been there in the immediate aftermath, the ones who had held me while I cried, and reinforced that idea of the never again love. They looked at this new happiness with a kind of gentle skepticism, as if they were worried I was the room. It just feels surreal, like I am reading about someone else's life. I put the phone down, screen first, and just lie there for a moment. The room is still, the house is quiet. I can hear the soft sound of his breathing next to me. This is the calm before the storm of well-wishing, the flood of calls. Will return later. But for now, it's just this profound, almost weightless feeling of culmination. This is the day after the day that changed everything, and the whole world seems to know it. And my mind, it doesn't go to the reception, or the dancing, or the vows. It goes back, way back, to the origin of the word that haunted me for a decade. Never. It was in my old apartment, the one with the terrible water pressure, and the window that rattled in the wind. The air was thick with the stale smell of a finished argument. The furniture was half gone, the walls looked bare, like the place had already given up. And she was there, a friend, I suppose, though her words didn't feel very friendly. She was trying to be comforting, in that blunt way people have when they think they're being realistic. I was on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes that held the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, while sipping the tea. It made her, she sighed, with everything you've been through, with all this baggage, I just think it's going to be impossible. You'll never find love again, not real love, not after this. And the worst part wasn't the sentence itself, it was the way my own heart agreed with her. It was the way that pronouncement landed on the fertile ground of my own despair, and took root instantly. It felt less like an opinion, and more like a diagnosis, a final verdict on my future. The despair wasn't a wave, it was the entire ocean I was drowning in. There was a sense of finality, like a heavy iron door had just slammed shut, locking me in a room by myself forever. That was just the first brick in the wall. After that, I started hearing echoes of it everywhere. My mother, with a worried frown, suggesting I should just get a cat and be done with it. A date. After I'd tentatively shared a fragment of my past, leaning back and saying wow, that's a lot for anyone to handle. They weren't always the exact words y'all never. But the sentiment was the same, it was a chorus of doubt. And I was the only one singing along my own voice, the loudest of all. I built a fortress out of those comments, a prison where the prophecy of being alone felt like an inescapable fate. I look down at my left hand, resting on the duvet. The morning light catches the edge of the wedding band. It's cool and smooth against my skin. Such a simple, solid thing, a circle, no beginning, no end. The absolute opposite of never.